I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The World Bank says commodity prices that have reached historically elevated levels because of the war in Ukraine will remain high through the end of 2024. The agency's Commodity Markets Outlook report, released today, says energy prices, food and fertilizer have sustained the largest commodity shock since the 1970s. Non-energy prices, including agriculture and metals, are projected to increase almost 20% in 2022. They will then moderate in the following years. The World Bank adds that a prolonged war or additional sanctions on Russia could boost prices even higher and make them more volatile than currently projected. This comes as cooking oil prices continue to rise, adding another pinch to households and businesses around the world. Well, with us now to discuss the implications of these rising food prices is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you.
Now, we mentioned prices are rising for food, fertilizer, and fuel, but this isn't really new news amid the war in Ukraine and the pandemic. So has the recent World Bank report highlighted anything new from what experts have been predicting for some time now?
Well, I mean, it's really confirming what we all feared, really. Unfortunately, this is going to drag on for quite some time. Of course, nobody knew exactly how long the conflict would last. We're likely going to miss this year's production cycle with Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. And so that really takes out a lot of products and, of course, fertilizers necessary for farmers to actually grow more food, especially here in North America. So overall, the entire world is really has been destabilized by this conflict, unfortunately. So we started the conflict with this COVID hangover. Supply chains have actually struggled, and that we were expecting that to last maybe 6 months to a year. If you add the Ukraine conflict onto that mess, of course, you're looking at least 2 years, which is exactly what the World Bank is saying today.
And it's interesting that you mentioned fertilizer costs and how they're interconnected with the Canadian agriculture industry. How does that translate to prices in the grocery stores?
Well, so many people wouldn't think about fertilizers when they walk into a grocery store, but it has a huge impact. The more you produce, of course, there's less pressure on markets, and of course, manufacturers can actually buy cheaper ingredients to make the food we all buy every day. The thing that most Canadians don't know is that Canada really contributes to unaffordable fertilizers with both Mosaic and Nutrien working together through Canpotex. And Canpotex really is the agent which represents both companies to get the best price possible. So the system we have in Canada for fertilizers actually inflates fertilizer prices around the world, not just for Europe or Asia, around the world, because the fertilizers we buy in Canada, well, prices are influenced by world markets, and we're part of the world market. So I think this is something we're going to have to tackle at some point as Canadians.
And on top of all of this, we mentioned cooking oil prices have also been rising. So what are the main types of cooking oil implicated, and what are they used for?
So in today's report with the World Bank, they actually did discuss the issue of vegetable oils, which is actually an important issue. We're starting to see countries hedging against what's happening right now. So Indonesia decided to halt exports of palm oil, and so you may say, well, yes, Nestle and Ferrero Rocher and Mondelez will be impacted by having access to less palm oil, but that's going to put a pressure on all vegetable oils around the world, including olive oil, for example, and other types of oil that is needed to do everything we do, both in food service and food retail. So that's we're expecting more of these decisions to happen in the next while as nations unfortunately start to protect their own as much as possible against what's happening everywhere.
All right, Doctor, just about 45 seconds left here, but I guess the big question here would be, when can consumers expect some relief from these rising prices?
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, to be honest. If the current inflationary cycle were a baseball game, we're basically probably starting the second inning right now. So we have a long way to go. And again, going back to, I absolutely agree with today's report coming from the World Bank. We're in this for a while. So look for coupons, look at your flyers as much as possible to save money.
A long way to go indeed. Dr. Charlebois, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily. Dr. Anthony Fauci says the United States is out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden said this in an interview with PBS NewsHour Tuesday. Dr. Fauci, who is also the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, mentioned that the U.S. is at a low level right now in terms of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. Meanwhile, back at home, restrictions continue to ease amid the current wave of the highly transmissible Omicron BA.2 subvariant. So when will Canada declare the pandemic phase in this country over? Well, joining us now in our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, medical director at Apr Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Pleasure to be here.
So what does Dr. Fauci mean when he says the pandemic phase is over in the United States?
That's right. So when Dr. Fauci says that, what he means is the United States doesn't have the 900,000 new infections a day or tens and tens of thousands of hospitalizations and thousands of deaths that they did experience during the pandemic. They really are at a much lower level right now. As of yesterday, the United States was about 55,000 new infections, close to around 11,000 hospitalizations and 300 deaths. So COVID-19 cases in the United States have definitely tumbled dramatically over the past few months as the Omicron wave has receded. But daily cases are still climbing a little bit there. And so for now, it seems that the worst of the pandemic may be over for the United States.
So what does this mean for Americans overall, Dr. Raut? Can they go back to regular life without precautions like social distancing and masking?
It's interesting. I think what regular life is has really changed forever, regardless of the precautions or lack thereof in masking or sanitizing or social distancing. I think a lot of people have automatically incorporated it into their practice, despite the guidelines saying they may not need it anymore. A poll in the United States showed that 44% say that they still wear a face mask around people outside their homes. About 40% avoid non-essential travel compared to 60% in January. And about 47%, so nearly half, regularly stay away from large groups, which is down from 65% in January.
And what is the likeliness of the U.S. falling back into a pandemic phase following this announcement, Dr. Raut?
It's interesting. I think it's very much possible to fall back. As Fauci says, the world is still in a pandemic. There's no doubt about that. And there's no misinterpretation of that. They're still facing a pandemic. But there's an interesting report from the Center of Disease Control that shows that roughly 3 in 5 people in the United States have already been infected by COVID-19. About 1 in 4 people had a first-time infection during this winter wave caused by the Omicron variant. So what that suggests is the country as a whole has a much higher level of collective immunity than before Omicron, which is far less clear how long this immunity will persist. So if the immunity wanes, let's say in 3 months, the United States might find themselves back to square one.
We'll definitely have to keep an eye on that, Dr. Raut. Now, bringing this back home to our Canadian viewers, how does Canada compare to the U.S. in terms of its own pandemic phase?
Well, as of yesterday, we've had new cases about 7,500. But remember, just around 2 weeks ago, we saw confirmed cases of 65,000 with cases in the community, much higher than that. But according to our own COVID-19 experts, after more than 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, about a third of Canadians have been infected with the virus. So that seroprevalence analysis of the blood samples across the country shows that that rapid spread of Omicron variant has probably doubled the natural infection rate. So with that infection comes immunity. So I am very optimistic that we too will be soon out of this pandemic phase.
All right, Dr. Raut, we're expecting a pretty busy season coming up as restrictions continue to ease. So how can Canadians enjoy their summer safely?
I think it's been one heck of a ride with COVID-19, but things are definitely looking up. I think we still need to be cognizant of social distancing, washing hands, but we should certainly embrace the few months of summer that we do have. Make a list of things that you do want to do, which do not include large, colossal groups of people in close proximity, and then do them when we have the chance.
All right, Dr. Raut, just about 45 seconds left here, but I'm going to throw a bit of a tough question at you. But when do you eventually see Canada coming out of the pandemic?
Well, I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves just yet. Things are looking good, and we're definitely in a much better place than other places. But I wouldn't throw out our masks just yet and pretend the pandemic is over. I personally think we'll have a pretty good summer and early autumn, but what we will see is the case counts may go back up, just like with seasonal infections such as coronavirus and influenza viruses in the fall.
All right, Dr. Raut, always great having you on Forum Daily. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks so much.
All right, up next, we take a look at what free speech on Twitter under Elon Musk's management would look like. Our interview with Dr. Kristen Martin up next. Tesla billionaire Elon Musk has successfully arranged to buy Twitter for about $44 billion US. His stated aim is to turn it into a haven for free speech. But the social platform has been down this road before, and it didn't end well last time. While Mr. Musk's pitch may sound straightforward, neither tech giants nor entrepreneurs have managed to make a free-for-all digital meeting ground work in practice. In past flirtations with light touch moderation, harassment and misinformation have overwhelmed many, driving away users, advertisers, or both. Well, joining us now to give us an idea of what exactly this acquisition means for the future of Twitter is Dr. Kristen Martin, professor of technology ethics at the University of Notre Dame. She joins us from Indiana. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Musk says he wants to turn Twitter into a platform for free speech. So what policies did Twitter have to prevent what Mr. Musk describes as free speech?
So I think what he's referring to are their content moderation policies, decisions that they make as to who is allowed to be on their website, if they're hate speech or misinformation, that someone could be removed from their website or certain content could be removed. And so for him, this level of engagement from Twitter as to who's on their platform is too much, and he calls it a free speech issue. It's not a free speech issue. It's not the government doing anything. But for him, this is curtailing a user too much.
All right. Well, we know this deal still needs regulatory and shareholder approval, but what are you expecting to be Mr. Musk's first moves on the platform following this acquisition?
Well, if we take him at his word, other than the edit button, I think what he's saying is that he does not like the content moderation policies, the policies as to who's allowed to be on the website and who's not, and he wants it to be broader. So fewer blocks, fewer people removed from the website. So we should see more hate speech, the hate groups that might be removed from Twitter that are on other social network sites, more misinformation. So the idea for Elon Musk appears to be that more speech that was previously removed should be let on the website.
Now, that's concerning because Twitter has a lot of power, and we saw that during the January 6th insurrection last year following Donald Trump's tweet to incite it. So how would Twitter, under this sort of Musk management, impact such polarizing voices on social media?
So I think his policies would do two things, and we can see this on other websites that have a lighter touch when it comes to content moderation. One is the spread of misinformation and kind of the off-website effects of that. So the recommending of the insurrection by Facebook or hate groups that form on a website and then manifest off the website. And so we see this in other websites that have a lighter touch with content moderation and allow hate groups to be recommended. So not only remaining on the website, but actually recommended into your feed. And we see the implications for different groups forming, different types of hate content, hate speech on the website. But the second thing that's a little bit ironic when it talks about more voices is that one of the repercussions that the more marginalized voices, so people who are the target of the hate groups, these could be racial or ethnic minorities, these could be gay groups, transgender groups, women, whoever is the target of these types of groups actually have less likelihood to be on the website because they're going to have their voices silenced. And so having more voices does not necessarily mean more speech. If it's the wrong voices that are bullying, then you actually have less speech on the platform.
Now, that's interesting because Twitter did go down a similar road before. And as we mentioned, because of the issue of misinformation and harassment, it saw a lot of users leave, including advertisers. Right. So do you see something similar happening under the Musk takeover?
I do. Twitter doesn't have as large of a user base to have the muscle that Facebook has when it comes to advertising. For some advertisers, they feel that they can't get off of Facebook because the only way to reach their users is through Facebook. That's not the same with Twitter. People are not using Twitter as the sole source of news or all of their kind of online content. And so the advertisers could easily leave Twitter if they don't like the content, if they don't want their advertising for a car or clothes to be right next to a hate group's promotion of hate speech, then they could easily leave the advertising to another platform.
All right, ma'am, just about a quick 30 seconds left here, but how do you see Twitter evolving in the next few years following this acquisition?
Oh, I think, it's a shame because Twitter's really been doing well in all of the social media platforms of trying to, one, be very targeted and responsible about their content moderation. They're not perfect, but you can see them striving to do better and trying to remove hate speech or anything that would actually make the speech less civil on the platform. They've been making great hires in machine learning ethics, and their entire group in that area, they criticize their own work and publicize it. They are really defensive of their own users and trying to protect their anonymity. So in many ways, their social media platform has been what we would strive for in this area. And so I can see this actually taking a turn where they are not rewarded for that type of behavior and in fact turn the other way.
All right, Dr. Martin, thank you for your time. We'll be right back after a short break. The Biden administration has warned the Solomon Islands that the United States will take unspecified action against the South Pacific nation. This, if its recently concluded cooperation agreement with China poses a threat to U.S. or allied interests. The White House says the message was delivered directly to the country's leadership on Thursday by a visiting senior U.S. delegation. The visit came just days after China and the Solomons confirmed they had signed a security pact, which is a development that has alarmed neighboring countries and Western allies who fear a military buildup in the region. Well, with us now to discuss this situation is Ms. Cleo Pascal, non-resident senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and special correspondent for the Sunday Guardian. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, this meeting is quite a big deal, one of the highest level U.S. visits to the Solomons in decades. So what is the significance of this direct message from the U.S. to the Solomon Islands?
There are a few very important things to pull out. One is that it's a failure of Australian policy. Australia led a lot of Western policy in the region, including for the Five Eyes, which includes Canada. And the fact that this has gone so far under Australian oversight shows that there has been a real problem with Australian leadership across the region, and that's why the Americans had to come themselves. Also, it must be made very clear, this is a message to the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands. He's a corrupt, pro-PRC guy. He does not represent the vast majority of the population of the country. And so this is very much contained. It's not about the Solomon Islands as a country. It's about this particular regime that's in power and their relationship with China.
And for our viewers who may not be familiar, can you briefly go over the key details of the Solomon Islands China Security Pact?
It's a very almost colonial 19th century type of deal, which at the behest of the Solomons government, which again means this guy, Prime Minister Sogavare, he can invite in the Chinese military to help suppress domestic dissent, for example, to protect Chinese interests. He can provide a base for support, resupply of Chinese naval, air force, missile defense systems. It's very wide reaching and it's very protectorate 19th century style agreement.
And the government of the Solomon Islands is saying that this agreement only has domestic applications. So why is the U.S. concerned about regional security?
Well, two elements to that. It does have domestic applications, and the main application is suppressing the opposition to Prime Minister Sogavare. So if you care about democracy in the region, and remember, the capital, the main island of the Solomon Islands is Waddle Canal. This is 80 years ago this summer will be the commemoration of the beginning of the Battle of Waddle Canal, which was the last time the American military had to go in to protect and defend freedoms of the people of the region from an expansionist Asian power. So this is very evocative of that kind of a situation where you have a leadership that's a proxy leadership from an expansionist Asian power that now might have the military might to oppress the local population who really just want the sort of democratic freedoms that were fought for 80 years ago.
And to add to that, we've really been seeing China tightening its grip on the Indo-Pacific region. So how are experts such as yourself interpreting these recent moves?
This is not unexpected. We've been seeing this happening across the region. This is the tip of an iceberg. So we've seen this, yes, in the Solomons, the deal is out. We've seen an actual piece of paper that's been admitted to be signed by both sides. But this process is very well advanced in a lot of islands across the region. And this is very much going back to a World War II type of map, where the Chinese looked at where the Japanese put their emplacements to try to block off the US and interdict Australia. And they're replicating it through political warfare instead of kinetic warfare, but it's moving very, very quickly.
All right, ma'am, just about a minute and 30 seconds left here. But taking a step back, how might the Security Pact affect the balance of power in the greater Indo-Pacific region?
It's designed to cut off Australia, so, and which means limit the Quad. The Quad is Australia, US, Japan, and India, which is why today there's a Japanese delegation that just landed in the Solomon Islands, also very concerned about the situation. So if you can start to break up the Quad, it allows a lot more maneuverability for the PLA Navy across the Indo-Pacific region.
What are you keeping your eyes on as this situation develops, ma'am?
There is an election that's supposed to be held in the Solomons next year in 2023. This government is trying to get the elections postponed. We've seen their budget for next year, and they don't even have proper funding for the election. So if they manage to create a security situation that allows them to invite in the Chinese and put off the election, then that's a takeover of the Solomons. And for the sake of the people of the Solomons who want democracy, we have to make sure that that election happens.
All right, Ms. Pascal, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Great pleasure. Thank you for covering the topic.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on social media. Thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily Week in Review. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care, Canada.